Imagine being told that your punishment will begin at dawn, and that your screaming will not stop until sunset, not because you will choose to scream, but because your body will be systematically destroyed in ways that make silence physically impossible, while keeping you conscious and aware throughout 12 hours of continuous agony that represents the most calculated application of human cruelty ever devised. This isn't a story about primitive brutality or random violence, but about the deliberate engineering of a punishment so scientifically precise in its application of suffering that it could guarantee exactly 12 hours of uninterrupted screaming from victims who would experience every second of their systematic destruction while being kept alive through medical intervention and mechanical support that prevented the merciful escape of unconsciousness or death. What you're about to learn about represents humanity's darkest achievement in the science of torture, a punishment method that combined advanced medical knowledge, sophisticated engineering, and systematic psychological manipulation to create what contemporary observers called the perfect agony, a form of suffering so pure and unrelenting that it redefined human understanding of what one person could do to another. The punishment known as crucifixion of the 12 hours was developed in 4th century Byzantium as the ultimate deterrent for crimes against the imperial family, representing a systematic evolution of traditional crucifixion that incorporated medical support systems designed to prevent death while maximizing suffering over precisely controlled time periods. Unlike conventional crucifixion that typically resulted in death within hours from blood loss, exhaustion, or respiratory failure, this enhanced version employed teams of physicians who would monitor the victim's vital signs and provide medical intervention to ensure survival throughout the full 12-hour ordeal, while the victim experienced systematic torture that was carefully calibrated to cause maximum pain without allowing unconsciousness. The medical support included blood transfusions to prevent fatal blood loss, respiratory assistance to maintain consciousness despite lung compression, and pain stimulants to ensure that nervous system sensitivity remained at peak levels throughout the entire torture period. The engineering sophistication of the 12-hour crucifixion apparatus reveals how advanced mechanical knowledge had been applied to the problem of prolonging suffering while maintaining precise control over every aspect of the victim's experience during their extended ordeal. The cross itself was constructed as an adjustable framework that could be modified throughout the torture process to create different stress patterns on the victim's body, preventing adaptation to any single position while ensuring that fresh sources of pain were continuously introduced. Mechanical devices attached to the cross could gradually increase tension on different limbs and joints, creating systematic progression of joint separation and muscle tearing that would maintain peak pain levels while avoiding damage to vital organs that might cause premature death. The most sophisticated versions included clockwork mechanisms that could automatically adjust torture parameters at predetermined intervals, ensuring consistent suffering even when human operators were unavailable. The medical knowledge that enabled 12-hour survival during systematic crucifixion demonstrates how healing expertise had been completely perverted to serve the goal of prolonging torture rather than relieving suffering, with teams of physicians developing specialized techniques for maintaining life and consciousness during extreme trauma. The medical team would include specialists in circulation management who could maintain blood flow to vital organs while allowing continued bleeding from extremities, respiratory experts who could ensure adequate oxygen delivery despite chest compression and lung damage, and neurological specialists who could prevent unconsciousness through the strategic application of stimulants and pain amplifiers. The medical protocols were so sophisticated that they represented genuine advances in trauma medicine and life support technology that were dedicated entirely to prolonging human suffering rather than preserving life for beneficial purposes. The psychological techniques employed during the 12-hour ordeal were designed to prevent any form of mental escape that might provide relief from the physical torture, with specialized operators who understood how to manipulate consciousness and awareness to ensure that victims experienced every moment of their suffering with maximum psychological impact. The psychological torture included systematic destruction of hope through detailed descriptions of how much time remained in the ordeal, psychological preparation for increased suffering through advance warning of upcoming torture phases, and deliberate triggering of fear, responses through sensory manipulation, and threats of additional punishment. The most devastating psychological element was the precise timing that allowed victims to track their progress through the 12-hour period, creating anticipation and dread that was often more psychologically destructive than the immediate physical pain. The systematic progression of the 12-hour torture was planned according to detailed schedules that would introduce new forms of suffering at predetermined intervals while maintaining peak pain levels throughout the entire ordeal, without allowing adaptation or psychological numbing that might reduce the victim's awareness of their condition. The first hour typically involved the initial positioning and securing of the victim, with pain levels being gradually increased as weight-bearing stress was applied to joints and suspension points. Hours 2 through 4 would involve the systematic introduction of additional torture elements, including cutting, burning, and crushing, that would create multiple simultaneous pain sources while medical monitoring ensured that vital signs remained stable. The middle hours would feature the most intense torture phases that took advantage of the victim's weakened condition while maintaining consciousness through medical intervention, while the final hours would involve systematic escalation toward death that would be prevented only by last-minute medical intervention that would keep the victim alive until the predetermined 12-hour completion time. The role of spectators in the 12-hour crucifixion transformed these events into elaborate social rituals that could influence entire populations while serving multiple functions of entertainment, education, and political propaganda for the authorities who organized them. The extended duration of the punishment made it ideal for public viewing, with different phases of the torture being timed to coincide with natural gathering times when maximum crowds could observe the proceedings. Temporary amphitheaters would be constructed around crucifixion sites to accommodate thousands of spectators who would gather throughout the day to witness different phases of the torture, while vendors would provide food, drink, and commentary that turned the victim's suffering into a festival atmosphere. The public nature of the extended torture was designed to create shared traumatic memories that would influence community behavior and political attitudes for generations after the actual event had concluded. The economic infrastructure required to support 12-hour crucifixions reveals how enormous resources were dedicated to perfecting this ultimate form of punishment, with specialized personnel, equipment, and facilities representing investments that could have funded major public works projects instead of systematic torture. The costs included not only the medical teams and torture specialists, but also security personnel, crowd control officials, equipment maintenance staff, and administrative officials who were required to coordinate the complex logistics of extended public torture events. The specialized equipment required for medical monitoring, life support, and torture progression represented cutting-edge technology that required ongoing maintenance and replacement, while the facilities needed for conducting 12-hour torture events required permanent infrastructure that represented major architectural and engineering projects. The international reputation of the 12-hour crucifixion made it a form of diplomatic weapon that could influence foreign relations and international behavior through the demonstration of willingness to inflict consequences so systematically extreme that they transcended normal concepts of military or political retaliation. Foreign ambassadors and visitors were sometimes specifically invited to witness 12-hour crucifixions, with the goal being to convince other nations that challenging Byzantine interests would result in consequences that no rational government would be willing to risk imposing on their own citizens. The reputation for extreme cruelty that developed around this punishment influenced international negotiations and trade relationships while serving as a form of psychological deterrence that could affect foreign policy decisions without requiring actual military action or economic pressure. The few documented survivor accounts of 12-hour crucifixions provide heartbreaking insights into the long-term psychological and physical effects of experiencing systematic torture designed to last exactly 12 hours while maintaining consciousness throughout the entire ordeal. Survivors described the experience as existing in a state between life and death, where time became meaningless, while pain became the only reality, with many reporting that they could recall every minute of their 12-hour ordeal years after the event had concluded. The physical recovery from 12-hour crucifixion often took months or years, with permanent disabilities including joint damage, neurological impairment, and chronic pain conditions that served as ongoing reminders of their experience. The psychological effects were often more devastating than the physical injuries, with survivors developing severe post-traumatic stress disorders that made normal social functioning impossible for the remainder of their lives. The medical innovations that emerged from studying 12-hour crucifixion victims contributed to broader understanding of human physiology and pain tolerance that influenced medical practice for centuries, though the knowledge was gained through systematic torture rather than ethical research methodology. Physicians working with the 12-hour system developed advanced understanding of circulation management, respiratory support, and neurological function that represented genuine medical advances, corrupted by their application to prolonging torture rather than healing disease. The documentation of physiological responses to extended torture provided data about human endurance limits and survival mechanisms that informed medical practice even after the punishment itself had been abandoned, creating an ongoing legacy of knowledge gained through systematic cruelty. The technological innovations developed specifically for 12-hour crucifixions included some of the most sophisticated applications of mechanical engineering, medical equipment, and precision manufacturing available in the ancient world, demonstrating how technological advancement could be directed toward perfecting human suffering when moral constraints were abandoned. The life support systems required for maintaining consciousness during extended torture represented advances in medical technology that wouldn't be seen again until the modern era, while the mechanical torture devices incorporated precision engineering that required master craftsmen and advanced metallurgy. The integration of medical monitoring with mechanical torture progression created feedback systems that could automatically adjust torture parameters based on victim responses, representing early applications of cybernetic principles to the problem of systematic cruelty. The religious and philosophical responses to 12-hour crucifixions reveal how even ancient societies that routinely practiced extreme violence found this particular punishment so disturbing that it challenged fundamental beliefs about human nature, divine justice, and the limits of acceptable cruelty. Religious authorities struggled to provide theological justification for a punishment that seemed designed purely to maximize suffering rather than serving any legitimate purpose of justice or deterrence, while philosophers wrote extensively about the moral implications of systematic torture that exceeded all previous concepts of cruelty. The cultural impact was so significant that references to 12-hour crucifixion became symbols of ultimate evil in literature and art, while many communities developed customs and rituals designed to prevent such extreme punishments from being employed in their territories. The documentation and record-keeping associated with 12-hour crucifixions created extensive archives that provide disturbing insights into how systematic torture had become a form of institutional science, with detailed protocols, performance standards, and quality control procedures that treated human suffering as an engineering problem to be optimized through careful study and systematic improvement. Official manuals provided step-by-step instructions for every aspect of the 12-hour process, including medical procedures, torture progression schedules, crowd management techniques, and equipment maintenance requirements. Performance evaluations were conducted for torture teams, with successful 12-hour sessions being measured by factors such as victim consciousness levels, pain response consistency, and spectator engagement throughout the extended ordeal. The eventual abandonment of 12-hour crucifixions came not through humanitarian reform, but through practical recognition that the enormous resources required for these elaborate torture events were becoming economically unsustainable, while their political benefits were being offset by international diplomatic costs and domestic social disruption. The medical personnel, specialized equipment, and complex logistics required for 12-hour torture made each event extraordinarily expensive to organize and execute, while the reputation for extreme cruelty was beginning to create diplomatic isolation that outweighed the domestic benefits of spectacular public punishment. The decline of the Byzantine Empire also reduced the political resources available for maintaining such elaborate torture systems, while changing military and administrative priorities made the investment in systematic torture less strategically valuable. Perhaps most disturbing of all is how the 12-hour crucifixion reveals the extraordinary human capacity for systematically engineering perfect suffering through the application of advanced knowledge, sophisticated technology, and institutional resources to the problem of causing maximum pain while preventing death or unconsciousness that might provide relief. The fact that entire professional communities could develop around perfecting 12-hour torture while maintaining their sense of technical competence and institutional legitimacy demonstrates how completely moral reasoning can be overridden when systematic cruelty is given official sanction and presented as necessary service to legitimate authority. This historical example provides a powerful warning about the potential for human intelligence and technological capability to serve the darkest aspects of institutional power when societies abandon moral constraints in favor of instrumental reasoning that treats individual suffering as acceptable cost for achieving abstract political or social goals. What do you think about this absolutely horrifying demonstration of how medical knowledge, engineering expertise, and institutional resources could be systematically applied to creating exactly 12 hours of uninterrupted human screaming through scientifically precise torture that kept victims conscious throughout their entire ordeal? Can you imagine the mindset of professionals who would dedicate their careers to perfecting techniques for guaranteeing 12 hours of continuous suffering while maintaining their sense of technical achievement and social legitimacy? The fact that this represented cutting-edge medical and engineering technology rather than primitive brutality really makes you wonder about the relationship between technological advancement and moral progress, and whether intellectual sophistication provides any protection against systematic cruelty when institutions prioritize abstract goals over human welfare, doesn't it? Share your thoughts in the comments about how this historical example might relate to contemporary practices that cause systematic suffering while maintaining claims to professional legitimacy and institutional necessity. If you found this investigation into humanity's most systematically cruel punishment as disturbing and thought-provoking as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more shocking revelations about how human knowledge and institutional authority can be corrupted to serve systematic torture rather than human welfare. Ring that notification bell, because our next deep dive will explore another historical example of how professional expertise can be turned toward perfecting human suffering when societies abandon moral constraints in favor of technical optimization. Trust me, these stories will change how you think about the relationship between institutional authority and human dignity forever.